You better not shout, you better not cry. Konami doesn't care if you've been naughty or nice. Yu-Gi-Oh! Banlist season is here. What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. It's that time of year again. It's time for the ban list predictions. So, a couple of things to keep in mind before we get into this. Do remember that we have the article from Konami stating that we're not going to be getting the ban list for probably about another month and a half from the time of recording this video, which means we're not going to be getting it until about the middle of September. It's a really long way away, but that doesn't mean we still can't analyze what we can expect from this upcoming ban list, because there's a lot to discuss. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting off with the banned cards. The number one banned card that I think every single person, well, maybe not everyone, but let's say a lot of people want to see banned is Max C. This is the side of the argument that I ultimately ended up on. Rather than it being at 3, I ultimately decided that this card does need to get banned. The reason for that is that this card kind of is falling in the same category as Vanity's Emptiness, where kind of the player who has this card has a very strong advantage to the point that ultimately it's going to be a card that ends up winning them the game. Even though Vanity's Emptiness and Max C function in two completely different ways, one locking your opponent out and one pretty much putting your opponent in this really awkward conundrum of how they need to play the game. They both essentially embody the same mentality and kind of create the same game state where the player who has the card is going to be at just a severely high advantage, and putting a card like that at 3, as we've seen when Vanity's Emptiness was at 3 in the past, doesn't really solve that, because that just means, while sure, you and your opponent have an equal chance and a very high probability of having that card, that doesn't exactly make it fair. So I think the healthiest option for the game is if Max C finally does hit the ban list. I think it's a long time coming, and this is ultimately where I feel it rightfully deserves and is what's best for the game. Now moving on, I do have Wind Up Hunter on here going to 0 as well, and I'll get into that a little bit more later as to why I think that is, but a lot of you, especially if you guys played back in Wind Up format, can probably guess where I'm going with this. Last but not least, we need to do something about Zodiac, and what we're going to do about Zodiac should be very simple. We are going to ban Zodiac Broad Bull, ban Zodiac Trident, and ban Zodiac Barrage. These are the 3 biggest, most oppressive cards when it comes to the Zodiac archetype. Zodiac Broad Bull, purely for the fact that it's just cheap, easy, free +1s for the deck, and it pretty much is just a constant stream of advantage that even if you take everything else out of the deck, this is just the card that's going to keep your engine going and continuously give you the resources you need to push and win the game. Zodiac Trident being one of the most oppressive cards we've ever seen in this game, essentially just immediately neutralizing any one card your opponent might have. Sometimes it can be avoided, sometimes it can't be, and the times that it can't be, Zodiac Trident alone can win you the game, and especially when you have multiple copies of it on the board, it can just be an absolute blowout. And last but not least, Zodiac Barrage. This is probably, arguably, the most broken card in the entire archetype. I've made the argument before that Zodiac Barrage allows Zodiac to kind of break the mold of what its inherent weakness is, in that, you know, it's a very normal summon reliant deck, and if you can stop the one normal summon the deck has at its disposal, there really isn't a whole lot the deck can do outside of that, but Zodiac Barrage gives the deck that extender that is not only free, but also triggers other cards in the deck like Zodiac Ram to generate you even more advantage. And if you don't have to pop itself, it's literally a continuous +1 for as many turns as you can manage to sustain that card and keep it on the field. It's absolutely ridiculous. It should have been banned a long time ago, but now is the time for it to go. So that's it for the banned cards. Moving on to the limited cards. There's going to be a lot of them, and we're going to start off with Blackwing Go for the Vague Shadow. Blackwing Go for the Vague Shadow is at 1 in the OCG currently, and as a lot of you guys are currently seeing, there's a reason for that, because the fact that Gofu is a 1-card Deco Talker, or essentially a 1-card Link 3, depending on the requirements of the Link 3 monster itself, the fact that it's essentially like the New Age Terror Top of the Link era is something that is very, very abusable in a lot of different decks. Now, some people might argue, you know, it's not a searchable card by most decks, so it kind of falls into the category of Terror Top, where it's not really searchable, but if you have it, it's kind of just utterly fucking busted. There's a reason Terror Top is at 1 now as well, and I definitely think because of the way the game is shaping up, Gofu should be going hit to 1 as well. Now, on that note, one thing I do want to discuss is Brilliant Fusion and Gemknight Seraphonite, because Brilliant Fusion and Seraphonite essentially enable the same type of, you know, summoning mechanic in the sense that it's allowing you to just essentially make link monsters for free, or at least at the cost of only 1 card. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see either of these cards somewhere on the ban list as well, whether they're going to limit Brilliant Fusion, ban Seraphonite, hell, they might even ban Brilliant Fusion, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see either one of these cards on here as well. And I don't have them on my personal list, but I definitely think that I wouldn't be surprised if they do show up in some form or another. Continuing on, we have Elemental Hero Stratos, the obligatory monster that deserves to be at 1. If this card went to 1, it wouldn't change anything. You might see some hero players at your locals just because Stratos is back at 1, but ultimately it's not going to do anything to the competitive metagame that's really going to warrant any sort of dramatic impact. I mean, the OCG has it at 2 and people still aren't playing heroes, if that tells you anything. So, after a long time coming, please, for the love of God, Konami, just give us Stratos back at 1. Moving on, I also have Masterpiece, the True Draco Slaying King at 1. This is a card that is also one of the most currently just biggest oppressive cards alongside Trident as well. I mean, it pretty much can pop a card just like Trident can as well, but the fact that it's immune to certain types of monster effects or spell effects or trap effects depending on the types of cards that you tributed, it's kind of this really powerful card that it's not, you know, ban-worthy in my eyes, because I feel like if a deck like True Draco or a deck that's splashing the True Draco engine has 1 copy of this as like its boss monster at its disposal, I think that's totally fine. But when you take into account the fact that it can be immune to all these different types of effects, on top of the fact that it can also pop cards as a quick effect, that's a lot for 1 card, especially when you have that in multiples. So I kind of feel like hitting this card to 1, following in the footsteps of the OCG, is a good thing, because it allows it that the deck that wants to play it can still play it, but once you remove that 1 copy, albeit with a kaiju or through battle or whatever means that you manage to remove it, you know that you're not going to be seeing another one for the duration of the game. I feel like that's a happy medium for Masterpiece, and probably the best place that it can ultimately end up. Next, we have El Shaddoll Construct. So, El Shaddoll Construct is, just in my opinion, a card that should just come off the list. I don't expect this, to be all honest, but I honestly think that it should come back, because even if it did come back, kind of like what I mentioned with Stratos, it's not going to do anything whatsoever. You might see some people just play Shaddolls for fun because Construct is back at 1, which means that the deck actually has some life breathed into it, but ultimately, you're not going to be seeing it anywhere, especially in the competitive metagame, but it's just a card that doesn't need to be banned anymore. Shaddolls are 2 years old at this point. The deck won't do anything as it currently stands, so just bring the card off the list. Then we have Evil Swarm Exciton Knight. This is a card that got reprinted in Battles of Legends Light Revenge, and in my opinion, there's no reason that they would reprint this card if they're not going to take it off the next ban list. That seems absolutely fucking stupid to me. The OCG still has it at 1 copy, so I think we're going to follow in the footsteps of the OCG in that respect as well, and we're going to be getting Exciton off the list. So if you haven't already picked up your Exciton, you're definitely going to want to do that. Next up is Wind-Up Carrier Zenmaity. I have been preaching for Zenmaity to come off the list for quite some time now, and this is just another time where, you know, it's another ban list prediction, so why the fuck not? Free Zenmaity. You know, the thing is, with the Wind-Up loop, one of these cards needs to be banned. Just ban the Wind-Up Hunter instead, so that the Zenmaity can be off the list, so that, hell, people can play Wind-Ups just as a casual deck for fun, because with Zenmaity gone, the deck is pretty much unplayable. So bring it back to 1, just allow people to have some fun with the deck. It's not going to do anything, ultimately just going to make some people happy that they can actually enjoy this archetype.
And then last but not least, for the limited, we have Dragonic Diagram. This is kind of in tandem with Masterpiece, but Dragonic Diagram has so much application outside of the archetype that it's meant for because of the fact that you're going to see this card in decks like Dinosaurs or all these other archetypes that can really abuse the powerful effect that Diagram contains, especially when you have it in tandem with cards like Set Rotation, Terraforming, all these other ways to get field spells onto the field. Diagram, in my opinion, needs to go to 1 because even if you have multiple copies of Terraforming, multiple copies of Set Rotation, Metaverse, when we get that into the TCG as well, if you only have 1 Diagram, it doesn't matter how many cards you have to search it, because once that 1 Diagram leaves the field, then you're not going to have anything left. So sure, you have the potential to get off your 1 Diagram, but if it gets disrupted or destroyed in any way, shape, or form, then that's going to do it, and then you're going to have all these other cards in your deck that aren't going to be able to do anything because your 1 Diagram has been removed. I feel like this is, again, a happy medium for this card, very similar to Masterpiece for a lot of the same reasons, but more so for Diagram because of the fact that it can be abused in so many other different archetypes as well. So that's it for the limited cards. Moving on to the semi-limits. Now, if you guys are new to the channel, you guys might not know that I fucking despise the semi-limited list. I feel that the semi-limited list is very pointless. Like, if you're gonna have a card on the semi-limited list, it should either just be limited or unlimited. That's just a personal view of mine, but there are 2 cards in particular I do want to discuss for the semi-limited list, not for the purposes of that I believe they should go on here, but that there's an argument that could be made for why that is the case. Starting off with Card of Demise. So Card of Demise was recently semi-limited in the OCG during their last ban list, and this is a really weird card because Card of Demise has essentially brought a lot of these lower tier decks to the competitive level because of the fact that Card of Demise with no cards in hand is a +2. It can very much so replenish your resources in all these slower decks and allow them to keep up in the meta. The problem is, a lot of the drawbacks of the card are entirely irrelevant because of the way some of these decks function, so a lot of people argue that it's not really fair that some of these decks can abuse Card of Demise even though they are lower tier decks. The OCG put the card at 2 for this reason, and honestly, an argument can be made that let's just keep it at 3 because of the fact that it helps lower tier decks compete with the higher tier decks, but then some people say it should just be at 1 or banned because of the fact that, for that very same logic, and it's not really a fair card. It can be a blowout, and plus it helps supplement some strategies and gives them some unfair mechanics that they might not otherwise have. So people are saying it should be at 2 because it's kind of the happy medium that, you know, they're not going to see the card as much, but it's still not going to be as powerful as it was. So I just wanted to throw that out there, pretty much just for some food for thought. The other one is Terraforming, and I kind of touched on this when I talked about Dragonic Diagram, is that if you have 1 copy of Diagram and 2 copies of Terraforming, that means you have 3 copies of Diagram, essentially, but you really have 1 copy of Diagram and 2 ways to search the Diagram. And then if that 1 Diagram goes away, you have these extra dead cards in your deck. Mathematically, that kind of makes sense to me because then it's like you still have 3 copies of the card when you really only have 1 true copy of the card, if that makes sense. But then Set Rotation kind of makes it so you have 6 copies if you're playing extra field spells, and the math kind of gets, you know, a little bit out of whack in that respect. But again, I don't feel that either of these cards should be on the semi-limited list. Just some food for thought for you guys that are kind of thinking about what you want to see on this upcoming ban list. Last but not least is the unlimited section of the list. Pretty simple, Artifact Moral Attack, because artifacts really aren't going to have a big impact right now. We saw Artifact Scythe make a little bit of a resurgence, but that's because Scythe is like a pseudo-dimensional barrier, not because Moral Attack is like the end-all be-all of artifacts. Inzektor Dragonfly, because Inzektors aren't going to do jack shit. Thunder King Ryo, because, again, the normal summon is so valuable right now, it kind of supplements some of these stun decks, these older stun strategies, like things that might play like Fossil Dyna and like a ton of traps, things like that. We had Thunder King at 3 a while back, and it was a little bit crazy, but the game was so different back then. I really don't think 3 Thunder Kings really going to make a difference. Look at it now. Thunder King's at 2 and no one plays it, so are you really going to play it at 3? I don't really think so. Then we have Wind-Up Magician, kind of just following in line with all of the wind-up logic. Witch of the Black Forest, because it was reprinted with an errata in Battles of Legends Light Revenge. So again, similar to Exciton, there's no reason they're going to print this card if they're not going to take it off the list in some way, shape, or form. It might get limited before it gets unlimited, but Sangan's at 3 and no one's fucking playing it. So again, Witch of the Black Forest can just fucking go there as well. Then we have the 2 cards that are probably the most impactful in the unlimited list, Book of Moon and Charge of the Light Brigade. So Book of Moon, I really feel is a card that could have been at 3 a long time ago. It's very versatile, it's very flexible. Some people argue it's the best -1 in the game. And now that we're in the era of links, you know, you can't even Book of Moon a link monster. Sure, you can book all the monsters that they might use as link material, but honestly, the fact remains that Book of Moon is a very good card, but has its limits in what it can really do, and I feel like it's a card that's ripe for coming off the ban list. And then finally, Charge of the Light Brigade is really interesting because since the Twilight Sworn archetype just got released in Code of the Duelist, I kind of feel that this is the perfect card to move at 3 because it might help sell some Twilight Sworn a little bit more. Light Sworn isn't really doing a whole lot, albeit it's still a very good like tier 2-ish deck. So why not put Charge of the Light Brigade to 3 and see what happens? I think that'd be a lot of fun and it would make a lot of Light Sworn players very, very happy. So guys, that's it for my ban list predictions. Just keep in mind that these are purely my subjective opinions and that your guys's might be completely different than mine, but I'm really curious down in the comments to know what your guys's ban list predictions are for this August-September 2017 ban list. It's going to be really interesting. Obviously, Zodiac's going to probably get fucking crucified, but I'm really curious to see what your guys' thoughts are on what else might get hit moving into this new ban list. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. And if you really like this video, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.